think it surprised me a little bit that the physical therapists in Japan do not diagnose patients. So in Denmark, when you're licensed to diagnose patients in the clinical practice when you're a physical therapist, if it's musculoskeletal diagnosis. And it also surprised me that in Japan you don't ask your patients to take off their clothes. We usually do is to evaluate movement problems, quality, misalignments, and general health. We often have our patients in a private room alone with them, so therefore it's maybe more okay to take off their clothes because there's no other people around. And so that's also a difference, that we have a lot more private sessions in Denmark. Whereas in Japan, there's like big rehabilitation areas.
I'd like to add about the privacy. I think when I were in the private clinic in Sapporo, but it was also completely open, and it surprised me like a bunch. And I thought what would also make with the privacy. In my case, I think it would be harder for the patient to come out with the things that they struggle with mentally, talk about really hard stuff, because what we also learn back in Denmark with our education is that we are the person that patients come to talk to if something is wrong, and something can be really wrong sometimes that they can be all the way down and their mental capacity is completely filled up and cannot handle anymore. So for me, I think it's, in some ways, I think it's really good to have the private rooms so they could feel free and open to talk about what is going on in their mind, and not be worried about other people listening in on the private talk. And I think with the Japanese culture, with taking time for the patient, I think it's really good what you have here. I've seen 20 minutes sessions, 40 minute sessions, 1 hour rehabilitation sessions. We talked about it, that's definitely different compared to Denmark. That's the last internship I was at. We have, when you do consultation, the first consultation, it's either 40-45 minutes, and then it's almost always 30 minutes. Then you have to pay extra if you really want the 1 hour, but normally it's half an hour, always with patients. So it's very limited time, and sometimes always we have to talk about students to students, and also with my colleagues I work with in the internship that is already a physiotherapist, that it becomes almost a little bit like an assembly line, almost a factory work, where you like as many patients as possible, because the more patients you have in a day, the more money you make as well, and that's a little bit worrying and a little bit scary as well, because you shouldn't think about the money, you should think about the patient's health and well-being. So that I think is very good with the Japanese culture.
I actually really liked working with stroke patients. So I might look into that in the future at some point. And then I could also imagine myself taking a candidate or master degree at some point. Because it could be fun to do some research in a field.
I want to definitely take a master in osteopathy, and then specialize in children maybe later on after the 5 years. I've also thought about starting my own company. There's many things that I can and want to do, but right now I think I should focus on doing osteopathy and see what it leads to after. Yes, but in private clinic.
Yeah, so we are in the primary sector. So, but if you're a licensed physical therapist, you are allowed to open a practice. If you open one within the system, you need something called an identification code. And you need the code to get subsidies from the state, and to ensure that the therapist is part of the public healthcare services. So when a patient gets a referral from the doctor to the physical therapist, then they will be subsidized, and then they only have to pay half of the price. And you can also open one outside of the healthcare system without an identification code, but then the patient just has to pay the full price.
Okay, finally, do you have a message for Japanese physiotherapy students and physiotherapists?
Yeah, the best message I would give as a physiotherapist is definitely think about always the patients. Think about not that you're doing a service, but you are actually helping another person that can have a really life-changing life-changing effects on that person. Doing a really good job.
Yeah, I wrote that I think we sometimes as physical therapists forget to include our patient in the rehabilitation because we have a lot of knowledge from school and theory and everything, but if it isn't something the patient wants to do, wouldn't fulfill their own goals, or they don't understand the purpose of what we're doing, and then I think it's really important to ask yourself about what you're doing. If you can't explain why you're doing something, then you shouldn't do it.
My first thing was gambare.